Good afternoon. Let's do some business. We are doing it live right here, doing more at 4 weekday afternoons. We get right down to business with the news-driven hour right after Ben Shapiro and just before the 790 KABC News Blitz with Randy Wang. Mottek On Money, live on the air, 790 KABC, streaming live online worldwide at KBC.com, and your on-demand Mottek On Money podcast, KBC.com, Apple, iTunes, and all your favorite podcast platforms. Rough day for the stock market. Stocks ending sharply lower today as, well, the global equities meltdown continued. We did see the ball get rolling in Japan overnight, where the Japanese stock market, reflected by the Nikkei average, plunged 12.4%, closing at that worst one-day drop since 1987. The Bank of Japan rate hike triggered an abrupt gain in the value of the Japanese yen, and that impacted a lot of things, which we'll be talking about later this hour with economist, investment expert, and currency expert Axel MERK will be joining us on that part of the story. Of course, the weaker-than-expected jobs report we got on Friday sent shivers through the financial markets as the nation's unemployment rate of 4.3%, hitting its highest mark since October of 2021, rattled investors and fueled recession talk. Looks like employers added 114,000 jobs in July, short of expectations. And that, too, impacted the markets on Friday, and the selling continued today in a big way. Well, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, are you sitting down for this one? Coming in for a closing loss of 1,034 points, nearly a 3% drop today, settling at 38,703. That was the largest point and percentage drop since September 13th of 2022. The S&P 500 gave back 160 points, settling at 5,186. That was its largest point and percentage decline since September of 2022. And the NASDAQ gave back nearly 600 points today, or 3.4%, to settle at 16,200. The NASDAQ has posted its largest three-day percentage drop since June of 2022. Follow the bouncing ball. A wild day for a crypto today as well. Bitcoin briefly tumbled below 50,000 for the first time in 6 months. Microsoft stock gave about 3% on the day and 7.5% in a 5-day losing streak. It's now, according to MarketWatch, the most oversold it's been by one key technical metric than it's been in at least 9 years. CrowdStrike, believe it or not, was up more than 1% today, bucking the market's downward action. An analyst at Wedbush said that investors may get some relief from the contents of a letter sent by CrowdStrike's legal team to Delta Airlines, which has hired lawyers to seek damages after a bad CrowdStrike software update led to flight cancellations and impacted computers around the world. Well, up until Friday, we were talking about a Goldilocks economy running neither not too cold or not too hot, a run of weak economic reports, though, to begin the month of August, now stoking fears that the bears have come home, and now recession talk here. Of course, the Middle East remains a nervous place. Israel remains on high alert for a major retaliation promised by its adversaries after senior Hamas and Hezbollah officials were killed last week. The Biden administration reportedly informed lawmakers that Iran's retaliatory strikes could happen any minute now, as early as today or tomorrow. We're watching the price of oil, which actually moved lower today in the face of the Middle East tensions, but concerns about the global economy weighed heavier, and we saw the price of oil move lower. In other news, crime hitting hard in the San Fernando Valley, with burglars hitting another home in Encino. Neighbors say they're scared and outraged. I'll discuss the latest on that with Nathan HOCHMAN, former federal prosecutor, former U.S. Assistant Attorney General, and candidate for Los Angeles County District Attorney. Nathan HOCHMAN will be joining me live later this hour. But first, on your money, the markets, the economy, today's sell-off, and the whole works. Joining me live now, John NAJARIAN, co-founder of Market Rebellion. He's known as Dr. J in the major financial networks, longtime contributor to this program. Also, he has the laser eyes on, following the cryptos closely. His latest book, by the way, with his brother Pete, is It's Not an Option. John NAJARIAN, thank you very much for coming to the line this afternoon.
Great to be with you as always, Frank. Thank you, sir.
All right. What just happened, John NAJARIAN? Give us your view of this epic day today.
Well, you've hit a lot of the highlights or lowlights, depending on your vantage point. Certainly Russia moving military transports like crazy for the last 3 days into Iran is not a good sign. It's a sign that they are stocking up for something. And of course, Anthony Blinken believes that something is going to be perhaps not just retaliatory, but perhaps an all-out war in the Middle East with Iran. You couple that with this, I know that you're going to be talking with Kit Jukes about the unwind of that carry trade where people borrow, at the very low interest rates that they can overseas in Japan. And all of a sudden, when Japan moves the interest rates up, which they hadn't done in decades, those people who are in that trade quickly start to unwind it, knowing that there are so many of them with a like mind, thinking Japan would keep those rates basically zero, practically negative forever. So when they all head for the exits at the same time, it's very, very difficult for the markets not to feel more than just a little push to the downside. It's more like a swoon. And that's clearly one of the big catalysts today. Another was one of the biggest crypto trading firms, Jump Trading, was moving a lot of crypto onto exchanges. Whenever that happens, people fear that the reason you've moved it from, for instance, cold storage onto an exchange is in order to sell it. And when that happens, of course, that doesn't happen in the stock market because most of us have our stocks at your particular brokerage firm. But with crypto, you generally want to hold it yourself and not put it onto an exchange. So when you do put it on an exchange where it could be hacked or stolen, it means that you're very much in the mindset of selling that crypto because, again, you already have it. You didn't need to move it onto an exchange to buy crypto. You're moving it onto the exchange to sell it. And so that was an awfully big order in Ethereum that caused Ethereum to drop by almost 20%. It certainly put pressure on Bitcoin. And you're right, we traded into the 49,000 range before bouncing about $5,000 to about 54,000. But there's a lot to be worried about. And it was just a perfect storm for a lot of those sorts of stories to catch the interest of people, not to mention the recession fears that you mentioned. We had been, 2-year had been over the 10-year bond for basically 2 years. And in the past, we have signaled recession when that happens. And in this case, the fact that it was there for so long, nearly these 2 years, is why people are very nervous about that the Fed might not be able to stop a recession, that some people would blame them for starting.
On there live with the one and only John NAJARIAN, and of course, not to pile on the other big story that got a lot of attention over the weekend, and certainly did today, the Warren Buffett cutting of half of his holdings in Apple by nearly 50%. We understand Apple among the casualties of the day here, closing down more than $10 to $209 in change. What about that? And of course, the whole tech space got hit hard today, including Apple.
Yeah, the losses in the tech space were astounding. The Magnificent Seven were just hemorrhaging cash at the beginning of the day. It wasn't as bad at the end of the day, but when you see a stock like Meta, which traded up to 530 on Thursday last week after its earnings, it traded this morning, I believe, down to 450. So nearly an $80 drop in 2 days. Apple was basically right back down to 200 today from a high last week after its earnings of 230 or thereabouts. I mean, it's been something to behold, not something good, but certainly something to behold. And it did indeed, during the flash this morning, lower, traded down to 200. Recovered to stop at 209. But I would say, Frank, that most of us think, number one, it's healthy when you get washouts like this. But number two, given that there are so many catalysts out there for this kind of pessimism in the markets, again, potential war in the Middle East, the carry trade unwinding, a lot of big crypto firms apparently putting a lot of crypto into the hands of others they weren't comfortable holding anymore, and Warren Buffett lightening up on everything from Apple to Bank America to, I guess, 4 or 5 other major stocks. It's kind of difficult to believe that that would just go away and we'd be back to business as normal.
On there live with John NAJARIAN, and the VIX index, the volatility index, on enormous spike, the likes of which we haven't seen in quite some time, and it settled up 65% today, up about 15 points to 38 and change. Would you continue to bet on volatility given what we've experienced here today?
I wouldn't bet on it given that move, like you say, today. I mean, on the highs today, believe it or not, this morning, we topped 60 in the VIX. Now, this was an index, folks, that was hovering at multi-year lows at about 12, not very long ago. I mean, you know, if you go back to, let's see, when was the last time? Looks like basically just after the 4th of July, we were hovering in the 12s. And for us to close today at 38.5 for the VIX and to trade up significantly higher than that during the day, yeah, that's something that people pay attention to. And that one trader that we know as 50 Cent, because he or she routinely buys 50 cent options to hedge themselves or to bet against a market calamity like this, made, I don't know, $50 or $60 million over the last few hours as the volatility index spiked as high as it did today, because that entity, whoever again it is, owned 100,000 call options in September at 25. So when it spiked up today over 50 and even touching 60, that was a monumental move.
Some people made a lot of money today on these wide moves. So getting back to cryptos for a moment, with Bitcoin seeing a dramatic move lower today and has rebounded since the lows of the last 24 hours, up about 1,400 now, I see here, back to just shy of 55K. Ethereum at the moment at around 2,400 or so, and Doge at the moment at 9 cents. Give us some more detail on your thoughts about what happened with Bitcoin today and the other cryptos.
Well, I think any day when it's a risk-off as big as this risk-off was, not just, for instance, a 1% sell-off, but a 4 and a 5% sell-off that the NASDAQ and the Russell were experiencing early on, even though they didn't close at those levels. The Russell closed down over 3%. Likewise, NASDAQ down over 3%, S&P down 3%. Those are big moves. And so I think people hearing the rumors about jump trading and seeing that people were pretty much risk off across the board, I would think that Bitcoin could and did recover more than the market as a whole. But this is still something that's, you don't want to just shrug.
If you're a facilities manager at a warehouse and your HVAC system goes down, it can turn up the heat, literally. But don't sweat it, Grainger has you covered. Grainger offers over 1 million industrial-grade products for all your operations, including warehouse HVAC maintenance. And even better, they offer access to experts and fast delivery, so you and your warehouse can both keep your cool. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
eBay Motors is here for the ride. Remember when you first saw the potential? And then through some elbow grease, fresh installs, and a whole lot of love, you transformed 100,000 miles and a body full of rust into a drive that's all your own. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, exhaust kits, turbochargers, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. See ebaymotors.com.
It off. I'm not saying that we need to have a significantly greater correction tomorrow or the next day, but it's going to be a very rare thing without the Fed stepping in that we see the market making a rebound very, very quickly, because, again, there are just too many negative catalysts out there.
On there live with John NAJARIAN, and as far as the Fed is concerned, a lot of people think they blew it this past week by not lowering rates last week following their two-day policy-setting meeting. I know you've been following that part of the story closely, and now there's a lot of talk perhaps an emergency meeting would be held. Remember the days during the pandemic, on the weekends they started announcing rate cuts back in those days because of what was happening with the economy and the markets. Might we see some dramatic action by the Fed, and do you think they made a mistake by not moving lower this past week?
At that time, I didn't think so. Today, it seems a little more like the markets are nervous enough. But again, this is a 3% sell-off is not entirely out of the question. I mean, believe it or not, the Nikkei over in Japan suffered over a 12.5% decline today. Again, that's another one of those things you'd stack up there and say, boy, things aren't great in the economy or elsewhere to have this many negative catalysts out there. But certainly if we saw another day like this, both overseas and domestically, then I think you would see the Fed have an emergency meeting. Otherwise, if the markets are up or down 1% or so tomorrow and we don't see the Nikkei and foreign markets falling as fast as they fell today, I wouldn't think that they'd have an emergency meeting over that.
And of course, another aspect of all this, the politics, people wondering, will it be Kamala Harris or former President Trump running the economy coming up here pretty soon? That's an important aspect of it, don't you think?
Absolutely it is. And it's one more of those, again, those negative catalysts, at least in this case for crypto, perhaps also for the stock market, because President Biden, and you must think that his vice president, Kamala Harris, would have both championed the idea of moving capital gains to 40% from where they are now at 20%. That would be a major catalyst for a market meltdown should they do that. And then you have the idea that President Trump and Mr. Kennedy, who's also running, we always forget to sort of include him in the conversation, but he is also running for president. And both of them are big crypto aficionados. And Trump and Elon did speak at the Nashville Crypto Conference last week. Kamala Harris was invited to speak, but then declined to come speak at that conference. So it's pretty clear that one party supports crypto and the other party doesn't, but probably does support a central bank digital currency, or CBDC. And the true crypto aficionados are not fond of that at all.
On there live with John NAJARIAN. At this point, John NAJARIAN, let me ask you the big question here. Is this washout going to continue here? And where are you putting money now and or taking it off the table?
I do think it's likely to continue, not at the same pace as today. And you would think that you might see a little bit of a bleed over tonight in Japan, and then hopefully some sort of stabilization or even a recovery of some sort, because 12.5% is a monstrously big move. To see that happen over in Japan is something you just don't want to dismiss. And they have their own reasons, of course. They moved up interest rates. They've been near zero forever nearly, and so, or even negative. So to see them move up this dramatically in rates for them anyway, dramatically, and then the reaction in their stock market, I got to think that this is not going to be positive for them.
John, thank you very much for taking the call here today. We certainly appreciate it, and we'll be following your your X feed, formerly known as Twitter feed, and also checking you out on the Rebel Edge that you do at 1 o'clock Eastern, right, every day. And
Yes,
that
sir.
is terrific. And, of course, the book is out as well. And we do appreciate it. We'll be looking for you and hopefully get a chance to speak with you again very, very soon. That is John NAJARIAN, the one and only John NAJARIAN. John, thank you very much for stepping up to the plate on this big day here this afternoon. 790 KBC welcomes Howard Jones and ABC with Haircut 100 coming to the YouTube Theater August 20th. Tickets are on sale now at Ticketmaster.com. Right now, caller 9 wins at 1-888-795-2222. You can get a pair of tickets to the show if you are caller number 9. The tickets furnished by Live Nation. Call now, 1-888-795-5222. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KBC. Not too many winners on Wall Street today, with the Dow plunging 1,034 points at the bell to 38,703. Worst day in 2 years for the market. The S&P 500 slipped 160 points at 5,186. And the NASDAQ down 576 points at 16,200. Bond yields also moved sharply lower. The yield in the 10-year note at 3.79%, sending fixed-rate mortgage rates sharply lower. Bitcoin kissing a 6-month low today, right now rebounding a bit, up about 1,000 at 54,500. Ethereum up about 8 at 2,443, and Doge at 9 cents. The volatility index, the Wall Street Fear Index, the VIX index, shot up 65% at the close to 15 and change, up 15 and change to 38.57. Google, parent company Alphabet, down $7.41 at 159 and change. Apple pulling back today by more than $10, back to 209 and change. And NVIDIA, the Magnificent One, taking a hit today, down nearly $7 at $100.45 a share. Among the winners today, there were some winners. Gold moving higher, up $7.30 at $2,451.60. We see silver up 15 cents at the moment at $27.36. Platinum up nearly 5 at $9.20.40. Taking a look at the price of oil here at the moment, moving higher by $1.29 now, back to $74.23 a barrel. Mottek On Money continues here on 790 KBC. In other news, crime is hitting hard in the San Fernando Valley these days, with burglars hitting another home in Encino. Neighbors there say they're scared and outraged. Now, this crime wave impacting the San Fernando Valley and other parts of Los Angeles continues. A-listers being impacted by this as well. Tom Hanks' home, Drake, Goldie Hawn, pro baseball and basketball players' homes have reported break-ins lately. Let's bring in veteran prosecutor Nathan HOCHMAN now, former federal prosecutor, former U.S. Assistant Attorney General, and candidate for Los Angeles County District Attorney. Nathan HOCHMAN, thank you very much for coming to the line this afternoon on this important story.
Yes, great to be on. Thank you very much.
What's your reaction to the latest crime wave with all these break-ins reported, especially in the San Fernando Valley?
So it's not a shock that criminals have become emboldened over the last 3.5 years of our current DA, George Gascon's policies. He's basically said to criminals that, look, we're not going to prosecute certain crimes and certain criminals, whether you use a gun, whether you're under 18 and you steal just under $950, whether you're part of a gang. So criminals have gotten emboldened as a result of this. And what has happened is that, they've spiraled this upwards, because they also know that even if they get caught, they'll be caught in the morning and released in the afternoon. So again, with people, people are at their wits' end. We have seen droves of people leave Los Angeles County. It wasn't the high taxes, the traffic, the smog, or the earthquakes that got them out. It was fear for themselves, their home, their families, their cars, their stores. Fear is what's driving out under our current DA's pro-criminal policies.
On the air live with Nathan HOCHMAN, former federal prosecutor, former U.S. Assistant Attorney General, and candidate for Los Angeles County District Attorney, running against the incumbent, soft-on-crime incumbent, George Gascon. What is it going to take to turn this situation around at this point?
What it'll take is going back to what prosecutors used to do for decades. And it's holding criminals accountable in a smart way. I reject all extreme policies, whether it's mass incarceration on one end of the pendulum or decarceration that George Gascon's put on the other end of the pendulum swing. What we need to do is go back to what I call the middle or the hard middle, because you look at each case individually. You look at the defendant and the defendant's background. You look at the crime committed, you look at the impact on the victim to determine who the true threats are to our public safety and need to be behind bars, and quite candidly, the ones that aren't. Your first-time nonviolent offender still has to pay a debt to society if they violate society's laws, but that debt can be paid through community service, restitution. If they stole something, pay it back. Or you can go ahead and, if they have a substance abuse addiction or a mental illness issue, use a diversion program. But what you can't do is what George Gascon has done, which is basically tell certain crimes or certain criminals that their crimes will not be punished at all, which is now a license to steal.
On the Air Live with Nathan HOCHMAN, you're speaking to the business audience here in a big way. What is your message to all the business owners that have been suffering the heartbreak and terror, really, of these smash and grabs and all the retail crime out there?
You know, my message is that I completely understand the suffering that the business community has been going through. I have spoken to small and big and large business owners throughout this entire county, whether it was in East Los Angeles, San Pedro, Lancaster, Santa Clarita, Compton, Santa Monica, or up in the San Gabriel Mountains. And what I have found is that they're enormously frustrated. If they call the police are telling them, look, we're not even going to investigate the case because the DA's office isn't going to prosecute. And if we arrest someone, they'll be back in your store in the afternoon. And many don't even file an insurance claim because the insurance company will cancel their policy. So what they need is a DA that's going to go back and be a partner with law enforcement, a partner with victims and small business owners to basically say to the criminals, here's the line. The line are...
At your job, do you ever have to deal with a nose roller? How about a snub pulley? Well, if you're installing a new conveyor belt system, dealing with the different components can sound like you're speaking a foreign language. Luckily, you've got a team ready to help. Grainger's technical product specialists are fluent in maintenance, repair, and operations. So whenever you want to talk shop, just reach out. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
eBay Motors is here for the ride. Remember when you first saw the potential? And then through some elbow grease, fresh installs, and a whole lot of love, you transformed 100,000 miles and a body full of rust into a drive that's all your own. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, exhaust kits, turbochargers, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. See ebaymotors.com.
The laws in our society. We will consistently, fairly, and impartially enforce that line, and there are real consequences on the other side. So my target year that I'm trying to go back to is not the 1960s or the 70s, it's 2014. That year was considered our safest year in the last 50 years because deterrence was working. And criminals understood where the lines were, they were being enforced, and they actually didn't commit crimes in record numbers that year, and we had a whole lot less victims.
It was just early this morning, in the early morning hours, just before 3 a.m., one of the latest crime reports that we got was that police were searching for as many as 5 burglary suspects who used power tools to break into and loot a clothing store in the Fairfax area on Melrose, 7600 block of Melrose. This, of course, a very popular tourist destination, and everybody loves Melrose, and you have crime and these break-ins happening there. What specifically is your message to the folks there on Melrose?
Again, I feel for the people on Melrose. I've shopped on Melrose off and on my entire 60 years. And it used to be a great place to go. People would hang out on Melrose. The businesses were booming. And all of a sudden you now have, over the last 3.5 years, a culture of crime, a spiral of lawlessness that started small and is growing and growing every day. What I'm telling them is basically vote. Vote on November 5th. Vote in the DA's race. Vote for someone who, like myself, Nathan HOCHMAN, who will go back to holding criminals accountable and re-achieve that deterrence that we had starting in 2014 and right before it. based on, again, the enforceability of laws, holding, again, people proportionally and reasonably responsible for the actions that they're committing.
And what's your message to the LAPD and other police departments in the area? Obviously they play the frontline role in all of this, apprehending these people, and they've been very frustrated by them being let off the hook right away. What's your message to the police out there?
My message to the police is help is on its way. It's going to require getting rid of this DA, Gascon, on November 5th and bringing in someone new who can actually be a partner with the police. Right now, and again, my brother and I founded the LA Sheriff's Foundation back in 2020 during the defund the police movement. We actually believed the police needed more resources. We've raised them over $1 million through private funds to help supplement their budgets. But I tell those police officers, I said, I get it. You're on the front lines, and the DA's office is more interested in prosecuting you than partnering with you. I can bring back that partnership from day one. I've been dealing with law enforcement for over 34 years. I will have their back. And by the way, it doesn't mean that if a law enforcement officer crosses the line, we're not going to go after them. Of course we're going to go after them. In fact, what law enforcement tells me is that no one hates a bad cop more than a good cop. So I will partner with the DA's office, with those 750 prosecutors who are dying to go ahead and bring back that partnership with law enforcement. We will bring that partnership back. We'll actually go after the criminals who are in threatening the safety, threatening the viability and the survivability of small businesses throughout this entire county, and we'll do it in a smart, effective way.
On the air live with Nathan Hochman, and of course, voters will also have another important issue on the ballot, and that is the Prop 47 reform. What are your thoughts on the measure that's on the ballot coming up here?
So it's going to go into the number Proposition 36, and I'm a big supporter of it because what it's going to do is go after repeat offenders. So in other words, whether it's drugs, if you're caught on your third time and you're convicted, you would then be eligible for either treatment, mandatory treatment that a judge could order if you have an addiction problem, or if you do it a fourth time, you can go to state prison. On the same thing with the theft area. Right now, you can steal under $950 every single day of every single week and month, and it will never turn into a felony, and you can never go to state prison. Proposition 36 will basically say on that third occasion when you're convicted, you can go to state prison. And again, the goal is not to fill the prisons to the breaking point. In fact, that's the failure of the criminal justice system. The goal is to put the lines out very clean, very clearly, so the criminals understand that there are true consequences for their actions and then are deterred from committing those crimes in the first place.
Nathan Hochman, thank you very much for taking the call. I've been speaking to Nathan Hochman, former federal prosecutor, former U.S. Assistant Attorney General, candidate for Los Angeles County DA, running against the soft-on-crime incumbent DA George Gascon. We wish you all the best, Nathan Hochman. Thank you very much for taking the call this afternoon.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Mottek On Money continues here, 790 KBC, recapping our top story. Big sell-off in the financial markets today. The stock market's worst day in at least 2 years. The Dow down 1,034 points today, settling at 38,703. The S&P 500 down 160 at 5,186, and the NASDAQ down nearly 600 at 16,200. The yield in the 10-year note is back down to 3.79%. Bitcoin hit a 6-month low. It's rebounded now to around just below 55,000. Overnight, the Japanese stock market, reflected by the Nikkei average, plunged 12.4%, its worst one-day drop since 1987. This after the Bank of Japan rate hike triggered an abrupt gain in the value of the Japanese yen. Let's bring in investment expert, economist, currency expert, precious metals expert, AXEL MERK. AXEL MERK, the president and chief investment officer of MERK Investments, which includes the Van Eck MERK Gold Trust with the ticker symbol OUNZ. AXEL, thank you very much for taking the call, and give us your reaction to today's action, first of all.
Well, happy Monday, I would say.
Yeah.
It's been after the jobs report on Friday, suddenly everybody perceived the glass to be half empty. It didn't help that some tech companies didn't have fantastic outlooks, and that Berkshire Hathaway said they're reducing some of their investments in technology. But suddenly the glass looked half empty. And as you pointed out, right, in Japan, there are expectations of higher rates. As a reminder, the so-called carry trade has been very, very popular, meaning that people borrow in yen and buy higher yielding assets, and when that unwinds, it's like a short squeeze, and they sell their risk assets, say U.S. equities, and it pushes up the yen. So that's been happening, and so that can unleash a cascade. And today that glass was, I think, even less than half empty. It seemed pretty dry, that short glass today.
All right, and certainly with all the geopolitical concerns and Warren Buffett reportedly selling half of his stake or more than half of his stake in Apple, all of these factors converge today.
Yes, and by the way, I am not sure, but I would think that Warren Buffett probably doesn't personally make all these investment decisions anymore. His team has become more trading friendly than the past. Remember, Warren Buffett never used to sell anything, and he never used to buy any tech stocks. That said, you may like Apple as a company, but deep value it is not. And I'm not kidding.
He's not one to fall in love with stocks, certainly. And although you're right, he used to never sell, but now that was certainly big news, which perhaps rattled the market and certainly sent Apple stock sharply lower today.
Yes, and of course the question is what it means. To me, this has all very much similarities to 2000. It took a long time for the market to top out, but just a few weeks ago, the same people actually who told me in 99 that buy certain specific stocks told me that, yes, they buy certain chip stocks now, and they're selling some of this underperforming stuff in their portfolio. And so it's the same sort of mindset. Obviously, the difference is, but I would, and then of course we have an economy that's weakening overall, and that seems to be coming to people's realization now. One thing that's different is that the Federal Reserve has fewer indicators than in the past because they micromanage so many aspects of the economy themselves, and so they're looking in the rearview mirror. Everybody else does, and so everybody seems surprised that suddenly we're in a world that's slowing down.
You're also a prominent Fed watcher, and did the Fed blow it last week by not lowering rates following their big meeting last week?
Well, they're blowing it by the approach that they're having. They're blowing it by being a debating club that's eternally late. One thing I give Powell credit for is that he did not give forward guidance. He said he just can't say it. Obviously, he would like to lower rates, but he didn't. There are several economic numbers, including the one from last Friday, by the way, that come out between now and the September meeting. So that is good. But what would be far preferred if they got rid of the debating aspects of that and went more to a rules-based approach and simply use some basic indicators to set policy that cannot possibly be worse than what they're doing right now. They were late in hiking. They're going to be late in lowering. And then the reason why they do this in part is because they think they're high enough so they can always go down. Now, a side effect is that everybody thinks the Fed is going to come to the rescue, and that's how you create these extreme valuations, some of which we're coming down from now. All
right. The yen got all the attention overnight. How's the dollar holding up in all this?
Well, the dollar has weakened substantially overnight. The euro briefly touched 110. And part of that is that now there are two full rate cuts priced in the September meeting. And ultimately, of course, the Federal Reserve is not going to lower rates simply because there's a market sell-off. The question is whether it spills over to other markets, most notably whether the so-called credit spreads increase, meaning that the less creditworthy companies suddenly have to pay much, much more to borrow money versus the Treasury securities. And that has increased. It hasn't, quote unquote, blown out. But if that were to worsen significantly, then it might get the Fed's attention. And I mentioned that in response to your question on the dollar, because that could presumably mean that the dollar is going to weaken further.
We did see gold hold up pretty well today. I guess we can call it analog gold, right? Compared to digital gold, crypto Bitcoin cracked below 50K today, hitting a 6-month low. What are your observations here on how gold has performed in the face of all this, and how the cryptos have performed as well?
In the initial sell-off, gold often also get sold off a little bit as part of the deleveraging, but to the extent that this will continue and to the extent that the Federal Reserve might step in that sort of environment, if history is any guide, gold may do quite well. On the digital asset side, crypto is still so young, so it remains to be seen. It's mostly a speculative asset, and in that sense, it's very consistent that it's all sold off more. Gold is, of course, volatile, but nothing compared to Bitcoin, for example. Again, no investment advice. That's historically much more volatile. And it's just that of late, cryptocurrencies haven't been quite as volatile, with the exception, of course, the last few weeks maybe.
Axel, thanks for taking the call on this big day, one for the history books, certainly, with this big sell-off here today. Axel Merk, thank you very much for joining us live here on Mottek On Money on 790 KBC. We certainly appreciate it and look forward to speaking with you again very soon. Recapping the day, the Dow down 1,034 points, the S&P 500 down 160, the NASDAQ down 576. Stay tuned now for the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang, and I'll be back tomorrow at 4 with Mottek On Money on 790 KBC.
We're all juggling life, a career, and trying to build a little bit of wealth. The Brown Ambition podcast with host Mandy and Tiffany the Budgetnista can help.
Let's talk about the financials behind locks. It can be quite pricey, but as your hair locks, it needs way less product. When I had my fro, it was way more costly as it relates to products because my fro was thirsty.
It's very expensive. Yeah.
Yes. I need the whole bottle. So
a dime-sized portion of what?
Girl, the laughter.
Brown Ambition.
Wherever you listen.